All right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mark. Okay, good morning, forum members. And I'm Suvania Naidoo. I'm a senior lecturer and social science researcher at the University of South Africa, but I'm currently heading the teaching and learning community engagement and student support portfolio for the college. So I'm here to make the committee aware of my book that was launched in October 2022. It's my second book on acid mine drainage from a social science perspective, and the research that I conducted that's relevant to the work of this committee. So the book is not a product of the findings in itself or the objective set to conduct the specific research, but a 10-year journey. 10 years ago, I began my master's research, and then I completed this research for my PhD. So the book is a product of the PhD research, and the idea came about at my first book launch in 2017, where Mariette Lieferink, who was the keynote speaker, alerted us to the fact that the acid mine drainage treatment plant in the Eastern Basin will be launched on the 17th of Feb 2017. So at the launch of the Eastern Basin treatment plant, I observed the media and the public question many aspects of the implementation of the short-term treatment of acid mine drainage in this basin. And this is how I formulated the objectives for the study that developed into 3 findings chapters. So the main question that came to mind was, how can a launch of such a massive treatment plant that is meant to better the water quality create so much public negativity? Why does acid mine drainage treatment have such a bad reputation? So to unpack this idea, I eventually formulated and intended to answer the question, how is the water quality of the Blesbokspruit socially constructed in the context of acid mine drainage and its treatment, through exploring the different perceptions of various stakeholders and key individuals, how it developed and why, and what does this say about the quality of our water? So I will not go into detail about what acid mine drainage is or how it's formed and its impacts, as I assume you are all the experts here in the forum. But the purpose of me presenting today is to basically mobilize the research, to inform you of the study, and how I've been in dialogue with outside stakeholders to make them aware of this case. So the book has 8 chapters, and owing to the urgency that this threat posed to our water quality, I explain how the short-term treatment process unfolded, how the water is partially treated, where it's discharged, and that it uses high-density sludge process. The book provides details about the Blesbokspruit being a Ramsar site, how it was placed in the Montreal record, and then the implications thereof. The South African government's intention for implementing the short-term treatment was to ensure that less risk be posed to the quality of our water systems, but the way in which the short-term treatment was implemented and the large costs involved led to much public uncertainty regarding the impact that the short-term treatment would pose to the water quality of the Blesbokspruit. So, I mean, you would know, in order to dispose of sludge in terms of South African law, an environmental impact assessment has to be conducted to determine the impact on the environment, the water resource, and surrounding communities. So the book unpacks the environmental impact assessment process that took place in 2014 for the approved Fruitvlei site that was not used when the plant was launched, and then the implications and public opinion of this. So due to the unexpected change with the use of the site, the disposal site, the short-term treatment had to be implemented under emergency measures. So the required procedures stipulated by law in the relevant acts were exempted. This created much uproar from various stakeholders, especially activists and the community, and this is all detailed in the book. Furthermore, no environmental impact assessment was conducted before building of the AMD treatment plant and the discharging of neutralized water into the Blesbokspruit. And as a result, the voices of stakeholders along this water course were not considered. So various stakeholders, such as surrounding communities, local and provincial government, researchers and activists, the agricultural, industrial and tourism sectors raised many concerns during the initial environmental impact assessment public participation process. However, when stakeholders became aware of the fact that the sludge disposal site had changed to the mine void and that no environmental impact assessment had been conducted for this new site, it led to uncertainty. They felt that their concerns had not been considered and there was no purpose to the EIA public participation process. So acid mine drainage requires a natural science solution, but because there are people who live and work along the Blesbokspruit and use this water for various purposes, conducting a social science analysis had to be considered, and that is where I came in. The book presents an example of such a case in which it is much more difficult for decision makers to manage perceptions in the absence of an environmental impact assessment. So perceptions dealt with how various stakeholders and key individuals perceived the purpose of an EIA, considering that the treatment was implemented under emergency measures, whether the government had abided by the law in implementing the treatment or whether authoritative power was used, and how the impact of new mining applications and ongoing pollution incidents and the water quality sampling would be managed given the already sensitive system, and whether the eventual long-term treatment would also be implemented as an emergency without considering the public's concerns. So social constructionism was used as a theoretical backing to explain the factors that influence and play a role in how stakeholders view water quality, and was influenced by the social science premise that human-created events in the Blesbokspruit area led to socially produced understandings of water quality in a particular way. So this case study has demonstrated how the stakeholders' understanding of water is rooted within social relations and realities that impact on their thinking about water and its quality, and how these constructs are entrenched in power relations. So the book demonstrates how the social meaning of water, and especially water quality, is a product of the very nature of water. The quality of water is therefore a key point in how humans relate to and form their perceptions of water. It is not that stakeholders simply regarded the water quality of the river as being poor, but they are knowledgeable about it. They understand that the many activities and uses of the water that contribute to the deteriorated system. This all meant that in this case study, their concerns about water quality already existed long before the building of the AMD treatment plants. A common perception was that the effects of untreated AMD flowing into the Blesbokspruit would have been far worse than the current partially treated AMD. But a lack of trust already existed between the public and the Department of Water and Sanitation because of how the environmental impact assessment process was handled. So for this reason, stakeholders felt that the public participation process had no merit because the public's suggestions were not assessed. The transfer of information and lack of communication to the public regarding the implementation of the short-term treatment led them to question the management and legitimacy of the process, and that decisions made were linked to a power play. What further influences their social constructions of water quality and its impacts is based on how they understand the historical context of mining, and this then links to how they view current coal mining. Community members have an archive of knowledge on how gold mining boomed in the East Rand and how environmental legislation was not in place or adhered to, and there was a lack of requisite rehabilitation. So despite what was stipulated in those water use licenses. So now that stakeholders who have interest with the Blesbokspruit, for instance, be it residential interests, investments in property, or agricultural interests, and so forth, they all have seen how the physicality of the river has changed over the years from a seasonal to a constant flow due to wastewater treatment works, agriculture, mining, and now the treatment of AMD. This flow has a strong influence on their perceptions of water quality. And the concerns with the AMD project come from how the management of the water occurred in the past. So should future mining occur, knowledge of the history of experiences indicates the potential future impact, as in the case of new coal mining applications in this basin. So further issues that stemmed is that the East Rand has high potential agricultural land and should therefore not be compromised by open cast coal mining. Even though agriculture is also known as a polluter of water, it was seen as the lesser of two evils. This is linked to power relations due to evident issues between spheres of government, national government departments making decisions through authoritative and legal power without communicating and informing provincial and local governments who are responsible for managing and monitoring the water, and then within national government, and the decisions made to issue water use licenses, mining rights, environmental authorizations based on their portfolio, and therefore what is in their institutional interest without consulting. So the findings of the research indicate that the credibility of the acid mine drainage treatment project depended on the sharing of information with the different stakeholders, as well as taking their views into account in the planning phase. The fact that the approved environmental impact assessment for the sludge disposal site became obsolete because another site was used without an approved environmental impact assessment created a serious trust deficit with the public. An environmental impact assessment public participation process serves as an important medium for the public to be heard and for communication and information sharing to take place. This book concludes that the short-term treatment being implemented under emergency circumstances means that the relevant information was not shared widely, and that decisions made were viewed by stakeholders as serving certain interests, such as the project team and not the community. The book concludes that differences in access to information played a major part in why perceptions of the short-term treatment varied among stakeholders. With regard to the environmental impact assessment process or lack thereof, the conclusion, therefore, is that information on its own or the nature of that information is not the decisive factor, but how that information is communicated, how accessible it is, how the information is used to justify a decision. It is well known that information can be manipulated. The credibility of information depends on how it's used and therefore how it can support or influence particular social constructions. Knowledgeable members of the community are an information sharing grouping, and they often are the only means of information for the rest of the community. So for a government project such as acid mine drainage short-term treatment, the Blesbokspruit Catchment Forum serves as an example of how public-private interests can merge and how public participation can be structured, and its role as an influencer of social construction is undeniable. It could also take advantage of the fact that many representatives in this forum are from civil society and from the private sector and are willing to assist with their expert knowledge. The overarching conclusion about the factors that influence the constructions of water quality is that the facts about water in the Blesbokspruit do not speak for themselves. What counts as truth about water quality varied depending on the perspective of who was talking about it, what their purpose was, what their individual interests were. It also depended on whose decision was the most influential, whose decisions are based on authority or legalities, and whether these decisions are impacted or impeded by a lack of resources or by capacity issues. A case in point was the question of whether an environmental impact assessment and water use license for the acid mine drainage short-term treatment in the Blesbokspruit case study was required by law, or whether it was declared an emergency situation that existed, and could this be regarded as a legitimate exemption? Further, if a project is granted an emergency status, which exempts the project from conducting an environmental impact assessment, it should not mean that all initial stipulations in legislation are no longer adhered to, such as people's constitutional right to access to information. Constructions are influenced by how one observes how decisions are made, for what benefit, and for whose benefit. So social constructionism as the framing for this book was therefore significant because individuals felt that the government did not abide by the law when implementing the short-term treatment, which contributed to the negative perceptions of the short-term treatment. So the book showed that the different government departments regarded their legal power as sufficient to justify this exemption. Other stakeholders questioned that assumption on the basis of their constructions that no such legal power actually even existed. So this illustrates the point that social constructions influenced by power considerations often have little to do with objective characteristics of water quality, such as water quality sampling, but more to do with circumstantial or contextual influences, such as power relationships. The conclusions of this book have important implications for institutions and processes of water management. The findings have direct impacts on how public opinion is formed, how the public responds to public policies on water management, and how a sustainable development equilibrium can be established between water and different vested interests in society. This therefore has policy implications for the DWS when implementing the long-term treatment. There is a potential to rectify the implications that stem from power relations present during the short-term treatment. The first step is through strengthening communication and information sharing. The next is that the environmental impact assessment public participation processes should be taken more seriously in future, and people in the community have a vested interest in the environment and the quality of water. Yes, it could be because of their property investment, but that means they are committed and have deep-rooted knowledge that can only benefit the system and contribute meaningfully to reducing environmental degradation. So if all this was taken into account, or is taken into account in future, perhaps more receptivity and support will be given to the government in its pursuit of better water management. This will also produce more positive constructions of the water quality going forward. So the next few slides, I just wanted to share with you how I've been mobilizing the findings of the research. The fact that the research is engaged, it was not done for the sake of doing research, but for it to be heard and to make an impact at various platforms. This is some of the quotes that came out from the field work that I conducted. For instance, you don't notice the damage in the Blesbokspruit from afar, but it's struggling. It's an old lady that's been rehydrated for the meantime. A quote from Stan Madden, I'm a layman, I'm not an academic. I'm not a scientist, but I have a very deep feeling for nature. I'm one of those very old-fashioned people who think that I was put here to be a custodian. We haven't done a very good job of that. I'm not proud of our achievements in being custodians of nature. I am in my 91st year. I have children and I have great-grandchildren, and my problem, my serious worry is that I can't show them what I have seen on this Blesbokspruit. That to me is a tragedy, and it upsets me greatly that those children haven't seen what I've been able to see, and this is why I'm so obsessed with this and so upset that there is a definite and blatant disregard for its health. Other quotes that came out: we are not going to sit here and fold our arms because of the complaints. Why is the public kept in the dark? Why is only a handful of public people made aware and others not? Good governance means having processes and setting examples so things are done properly. Projects can fail because communication about potential risks are not clear. We find information from various sources instead of the direct source. Sharing information is such an important aspect to keep in the forums. The community must be seen as a resource and not the enemy. These are just some images of the engagements that took place during the research process with the various stakeholders and interviewees. This was just some of the site visits to the field. Some of the interviewees actually took me out to the sites. I also went with Sophia Saleh to the treatment plant, and she explained how it worked, which is all detailed in the book. There's a whole chapter on the treatment plant. And then the various platforms that have spoken about the research and, to make the community's voice heard and the findings, to mobilize the findings of the research, the various events that I have taken part in over the last year. And then just some write-ups, that in news and media articles that are available on the research that I conducted. And that's it. Thank you for listening.